In 1966, a man named William retired with what looked, on paper, like more than enough. He had a diversified portfolio, a paid-off house, and a withdrawal plan that any advisor today would still call reasonable. He pulled a modest, steady percentage of his savings every year, the same percentage his neighbor 2 doors down would pull 16 years later, in 1982. Same rate, same discipline, same math on the spreadsheet. William ran out of money in his 70s. His neighbor died with more than he started with, after decades of comfortable withdrawals, cruises, and gifts to his grandchildren. Same withdrawal rate. Same average market return over the following 30 years, give or take a rounding error, 2 completely different endings. And almost nobody who is currently building a retirement plan has ever been told why. This is happening again, right now, to people who think they've done everything right, not because they picked bad investments, not because they spent recklessly, because of something almost nobody explains clearly, something that has nothing to do with how much you saved and everything to do with when the bad years show up. I've spent a long time going through withdrawal rate research, pension fund case files, and 30-year market return sequences, because the popular version of this story, save enough, hit your number, retire, is directionally true and dangerously incomplete. By the end of this, you'll understand why 2 people with identical portfolios can have opposite outcomes, why the average return, number you've been told to trust, is quietly misleading you, and what a small number of disciplined retirees do differently that has nothing to do with picking better stocks. Here's the mechanism, and it comes down to one idea: sequence. Think of your retirement savings as a reservoir, and your withdrawals as water you're pumping out of it every year to live on. Over 30 years, it might rain the same total amount whether you retire in a wet decade or a dry one. The market, like weather, evens out eventually, but a reservoir doesn't care about the 30-year average rainfall. It cares whether it's raining during the specific years you're pumping the hardest. If a drought hits in year 1 or 2 of retirement, a market crash right as you start withdrawing, you're pulling water out of a reservoir that's already shrinking, and every gallon you take out during the drought is a gallon that never gets the chance to be refilled and multiplied later. By the time the rain comes back, the reservoir's structural base is already gone. It doesn't matter that the 30-year average was fine. The order the weather arrived in is what determined whether you survived it. That sequence of returns risk, and it's the single most under-discussed danger in ordinary retirement planning. Here's the arithmetic stripped down. Say you retire with $1 million and withdraw $40,000 a year, adjusting for inflation, which is the traditional 4% rule taught in almost every personal finance article you've ever read. If the market drops 30% in your first 2 years, your $1 million is now worth roughly $650,000, and you're still pulling out that same $40,000, which is now a much larger percentage of a much smaller pool. You're not withdrawing 4% anymore. You're closer to 6 or 7% of what's left, every single year compounding the damage. Even if the market recovers beautifully afterward, you no longer have enough shares, enough principal, enough base to fully participate in that recovery. You sold too much too early at the bottom just to eat. Now flip it. Retire into a strong first 5 years and the opposite happens. Your withdrawals are a shrinking percentage of a growing pool. The portfolio builds a cushion before the inevitable bad years arrive later. And by the time a downturn hits, you have enough margin to absorb it without touching the principal that's supposed to last you the next 20 years. Same withdrawal behavior, same average return over 3 decades. Opposite outcomes, entirely dictated by which years happen to be good and which happen to be bad in what order. This is not a hypothetical. It's documented repeatedly across real cohorts of retirees. The 1966 retiree and the 1982 retiree in that opening story are not fictional composites. They represent 2 of the most cited real return sequences in withdrawal rate research, the same data researchers used to stress test what's now called the 4% rule. One sequence survives comfortably, the other runs dry with years still left to live. The strategy was identical. The luck of timing was not. Here's why this matters more than almost anything else in your plan, and here's the part that's genuinely uncomfortable. You cannot control which one you get. You don't get to choose whether you retire into 1982 or 1966. The market doesn't know your birthday, your target retirement age, or how carefully you saved. This is the part mainstream advice tends to skip, because save consistently and retire at 65 is a much easier sentence to sell than the specific 5-year window around your retirement date will disproportionately determine your outcome, and you have no control over when that window lands. So if you can't control the sequence, what can you actually do? This is where most people either panic or give up on planning altogether, and both reactions are wrong. There's a real, mechanical answer, and it's built around one idea: don't force yourself to sell during the drought. Consider Linda, who retired in 2000, right before a brutal multi-year downturn. Linda had built, alongside her main portfolio, a separate cash reserve worth about 3 years of living expenses, boring, low-yield, unglamorous money sitting in the equivalent of a savings account. When the market fell, Linda didn't touch her stocks. She lived off the cash reserve for 2.5 years while her portfolio recovered, untouched in the background. By the time she went back to drawing from her investments, the drought was over and her reservoir was still intact. Compare that to Frank, who retired the same year with the same balance and no cash buffer. Frank had no choice but to keep selling shares every year regardless of price, because that cash was his only income. He sold low repeatedly for 3 straight years, permanently shrinking the base his future growth depended on. Same starting balance as Linda, same market. 15 years later, Linda's portfolio had fully recovered and kept compounding. Frank's never caught up. The difference wasn't stock picking, it wasn't returns. It was one structural decision made before the storm arrived. This is the actual protocol worth taking from all of this, and it's not exotic. First, build a cash or short-term bond buffer, covering roughly 2 to 3 years of essential expenses before you retire, so a downturn never forces you to sell growth assets at the bottom. Second, consider a bond tent, gradually increasing your bond allocation in the 5 years leading up to retirement and the first 5 years into it, then gradually easing back into stocks once you're through the highest risk window. Third, build flexibility into your spending itself. Know in advance which expenses are essential and which are flexible, so a bad year can trigger a temporary, planned pullback instead of a forced one. Fourth, stop anchoring your plan to a single average return number, and instead stress test your withdrawal rate against the worst historical sequences, not the friendliest ones. None of this requires predicting the market. None of it requires being smarter than professional fund managers. It requires accepting, ahead of time, that the order matters as much as the amount, and building a structure that survives a bad order. Here's the identity shift underneath all of this. Most people think of retirement planning as a single number, a magic total that once reached means safety. But safety was never really about the number. It was about whether your structure can survive bad luck landing at the worst possible moment. The people who make it through aren't the ones who got the best returns. They're the ones who built a plan that didn't need the best returns to work. 3 things to carry with you. The average return over 30 years tells you almost nothing about whether your specific plan survives. The order those returns arrive in is what actually decides it. A cash buffer isn't dead, lazy money. It's the thing that keeps you from being forced to sell low during the exact years that matter most. And real financial security isn't the size of your number. It's whether your structure can take a hit in year 1 and still be standing in year 30.